its multipolar collaborations, actually, because in part we can see that the United States is proving to the world that it is a capricious and an unreliable counterparty, where it doesn't even know how to articulate its own objectives to others when they're sitting across the table, but also that the United States has clearly shown a readiness to tear up all the agreements the United States itself has been a party to, whether it's the North American Free Trade Agreement and its subsequent manifestation, which incidentally was negotiated by the first Trump administration, all the way through to bilateral as well as multilateral agreements that the United States has been a party to. In that environment, countries that have benefited from intensified cross-border collaborations with others can see quite clearly that there is a need to consolidate the multipolarity that is emerging. This is taking place not only at the level of trade relationships, where organizations such as BRICS has played an important role over the course of the last 15 years or so, but also in other multipolar or multilateral trade institutions, such as within the Asia region, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So on a trade level, we're starting to, I think, see moves by nations around the world to find ways of consolidating collaboration rather than playing the divide and conquer game. We've seen intensified discussions between Japan, Korea, and China, for example, in recent weeks as a response to the uncertainties created by the Trump administration. We're also seeing this emerge in the world of capital flows as well. So we've touched on the expansion of infrastructure developments in the Global South, largely through the Belt and Road initiative, but also increasingly, I think, we are starting to see Chinese enterprises becoming global exporters of capital and know-how and technologies, not only in the traditional Global South, but also into other markets as well. So we have the BYD development in Hungary, I think, is a great case in point. The institutions of capital management will mature increasingly over the forward horizon, and it will revolve around institutions such as the BRICS Bank or the New Development Bank, as well as other multilateral institutions outside of the immediate remit of the IMF and the World Bank. The last piece, which you touched on there, coming out of the visitation to Vietnam, is actually the overlap between these economic institutions and organizations that have formed specifically to address questions of security. So the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the example that you mentioned, and that institution has played an important role, again, over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, coordinating nations across the Eurasian continent to better share information and to enable them to more effectively address particularly terrorism risks and other forms of externally instigated instabilities. So once you start to see the intermeshing of trade institutions, capital institutions, as well as security institutions, we will actually end up with a new fabric of the multipolar world. And that fabric will consolidate, I think, the collaborative relationships between countries and create the mechanisms by which the issues that exist between countries, and countries with borders always have issues, right? But they have a forum and a mechanism and an ethos by which they are resolved. And they aren't resolved by holding a gun at someone else's head, which has been the American modus operandi. They are resolved through dialogue and, you know, the patient work of diplomats to ultimately find solutions that strengthen the relationships rather than try to pull these relationships apart. So I think that they're the directions that that the world is heading towards, and this unthought out trade war initiated by Washington actually inadvertently catalyzes another round of consolidation of these multipolar institutions. I'm sure that's not what Washington had in mind, but I think that that's what's likely to happen.
So then should we be thanking the Trump administration for all of this?
The Chinese have a term for Trump. They call him Comrade Trump, or Trump who builds China. They believe that Trump is actually secretly, the meme is that he's secretly working for China. Certainly everything that he's doing in terms of trying to undermine China is actually blowing back and undermining the United States. We can take this all the way back to the first trade war in his first administration. Originally, the plan, the trade war had two phases, phase one, phase two. Phase one was he wanted China to buy more and to, remedy the balance of trade. And the second phase, which we never actually got to, was the demand was for China to dismantle their state-owned enterprises. Yes, that's exactly the image. But they wanted China to dismantle their state-owned enterprises, privatize, as they had demanded of the Soviet Union. And of course, behind this was both the conceit and the contradiction. The conceit was that, the socialist system has an unfair advantage vis-a-vis us because they can plan and they can, subsidize their economies in ways that we can't, such as like giving free education and healthcare and infrastructure. And on the other hand, the other conceit, which is the, Schrodinger's contradiction of everything around China, is that the belief of the neocons was that China would fall or collapse of its own accord, because according to their worldview, state intervention doesn't work. It impoverishes and destroys economies, and socialism can never work, and it's just a matter of time before it collapses of its own accord. So inside that contradiction, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration were making contradictory demands, but Trump's demand initially was that they wanted China in the phase two to dismantle their SOEs. And now they've pivoted completely. It's just a full frontal attack with no planning, no sequencing, no understanding that the counterparty could actually have a strategy or a counter move. And it's quite extraordinary, the ways in which they are making themselves both look like fools and undermine every source of strength that they have.
KJ said it all. My alter ego, KJ, he covered. I mean, it's true. The Chinese mean on Trump that he's 川建国, the builder of nation, the nation being China, of course, and he made China great, even greater. And the other nickname for him is Dong Wang, which is a king of know-it-all, right? Because Trump always claimed he has knowledge of everything. I mean, it's not a endearing meme by any means. This is just Chinese people are just looking at this with bemusement and entertainment, and they treat the whole shit show in Washington for what it is. It's comedy hour.
Since Donald Trump has come into office and then escalated this trade war, there has been this effect that we can see on social media, but it's starting to come out in data. The latest Pew survey says that Americans are warming up to China as the trade war brews. So it's still quite high. The disfavorability or unfavorable view of China is now 77%. But last year, under the Biden administration, it was a whopping 84%. Now, of course, these polls have all kinds of issues with them, but there is this general trend that as Trump escalates with China and the impact is felt, it's also having this, it seems to be having this quite global impact of actually turning people toward China and getting them more curious about China. What do you make of this?
Yeah, look, I've always thought that there's a few different audiences globally in relation to China's own communications as well as the West's. The West's propaganda machine has largely focused on its own populations, and the evidence shows that it has had a significant impact in terms of the numbers. But whilst that has been the case, China itself has continued in its own style, which is a very factually oriented, not a lot of rhetorical blushes sort of style, just continued moving ahead with the way that it engages, particularly with the global South. And, you'll find, in fact, that the attitudes towards China in the global south are diametrically opposite to the attitudes that you see in the West. So that's the first thing. I think that we've got different audiences. The second thing, though, in terms of the effect of the long-standing propaganda campaigns on domestic audiences, they do ultimately confront some real challenges. And the challenges, of course, just come from reality. And the experiences of the TikTok little red note episode speaks volumes about how boring of reality, the interactions with real people and seeing real things with your own eyes can ultimately affect one's perceptions of the world, and importantly, ultimately causes people to reflect upon some of the stories that they've been told and the stories that they've swallowed without question. So I think that there has some shift as a result of that little unintended debacle. And now we're going to have another episode, which is that the demon that is China, horrible, evil, communist, godless, thief, won't play by the rules, etc., etc. China, those awful Orientals, ultimately have also been the ones who have been working in the factories, providing the consumers with the goods that they take for granted on a daily basis. So when Walmart, which has 60% of its shelves filled by goods from China, and when Amazon starts to experience the supply chain constraints, then it's likely that those consumers who shop regularly at these particular distribution or retail outlets will start to experience China again through a different set of lenses. So we've had the real life China, which is, oh my goodness, you mean your education is low cost or free? And what do you mean your pharmaceuticals don't cost an arm and a leg? And my goodness, you seem quite normal to me as a family that I talk to on, Little Red Note. From that experience through to the where on earth are the basic things like diapers and other things that I've taken for granted as being just available on my shelves? Because, let's face it, 50%, the lowest 50% of American households haven't had a real wage increase in 2 generations without the low costs of imported products from Chinese supply chains in particular over the course of the last 2 generations. These low incomes and lower income, lower middle class income households will have had even worse material standards of living, even worse than they've had. So those realities are going to start to play out and play on people's minds and their experiences. So Danny, this entire episode, in a sense, peels away a whole bunch of realities, peels the skin off reality that has been masked by decades of propaganda. The idea that somehow China needs more than needs more from America than the other way around. Well, that's not the experience of a working class family. That's not the experience of a low income person who needs access to these low cost products to have a modest standard of living. So the materiality of supply chain transformations will affect attitudes in due course, and wait until the direct to factory and the bypassing of these platforms kicks in. People suddenly realize that the $100 whatever it is that they've been buying is actually available direct from factory for 10, right? And when that begins to happen, we're going to have another set of realizations, right? So we are entering into a period of incredible attitudinal flux because the experiences that people have of the world has just been turned upside down. And we can thank Donald Trump for his capriciousness in cracking this open and essentially laying it out there for people to see.
Something like a trade war, the idea of cost of living going up while relations around the world get worse, that doesn't breed a lot of confidence. That breeds a lot of anger. This global change that's happening around the world, led by multipolarity, is shifting people's opinions. And it seems at this moment it's led by China and, of course, Russia and in the rest of the multipolar world?
Well, I think it's important that it is led by China because, as you know, in the past, there have been attempts to transform this neoliberal system, and they've all been destroyed or tamped down very rapidly. But because China is big and powerful, and because it's spent decades building out relations and it's building it's building infrastructure and multilateral organizations to support itself, then it's not easily put back into the box and undermined. But I think, as Warwick said, this is a really kind of sobering moment for the world. People are seeing through the propaganda. Certainly, they're seeing through the propaganda about China, that they've been sold a bill of goods, essentially a set of lies. And they're also going to see it, and they're starting to feel it, that the US is not the exceptional nation that has the control of the global economy as it purports to have, as Bessent tries to assert. And I think we will start to see first the effects of inflation. As we know, there are about 70% of all the goods sold on Amazon come from China. If you tariff those, then those effects are going to be felt immediately. We're already seeing massive effects among small businesses. They don't know whether they're coming or going. And of course, we can also see the effects in the stock market and in the bond market, and even among the ruling imperial elite. They can also see that their portfolios are starting to get hammered. And so I think this just general process where the veil is coming down and people are starting to understand that actually socialism does work. Socialism as practiced by China does work. And it's actually the Western neoliberal capitalist parasitic system that is actually on its last legs. I think that realization is starting to hit people. I think it landed once in 2008 when people started to ask questions. And I think this time, I think it's becoming really clear and evident. It's a truth that cannot be squelched anymore.
A lot of the problems of the U.S. empire facing today is self-inflicted. That this trade war epitomized all the self-inflicted problems that the U.S. has incurred upon itself. I mean, this trade war is totally unnecessary, but what it did, exacerbated all the tensions, all the contradictions that already exist in the American society. As Warwick and KJ has rightly pointed out, you can fool some people some of the time. You can't fool all the people all the time. We have the red no moment, and then we have I show speed going to China. That's huge. I mean, just decade-long Cold War propaganda destroyed by one live stream. Seeing is believing. I just came back from China. I spent a week in Beijing and Shanghai, and just being on the street, interacting with the people, and seeing the mood is, people in China, they're not worried about tariffs, war. They have their whole busy life to attend to, and for them that means going shopping. I was on the boom in Shanghai, which is, I'm sure, 99.9% tourists. It's packed. It's jam packed with the domestic tourists. My feeling is China is already back. It has already recovered from the post-COVID hangover and the burst of the real estate bubble. It's actually a good thing that Chinese government, deflated the real estate bubble the way they did, so that they had to pay up front. And now China is already on the recovery mode. I mean, compared to those two events, the tariff war is nothing. It's nothing. I mean, the people in the Washington don't realize the whole Chinese export to United States only composed of 3% of Chinese GDP. I mean, take that off. Yes, it's going to hurt for some people in the particular the export industries, but for China as a whole, it's not existential. It's not existential in the way where the current American way of life is sustained by the supply is coming to China. 80% of antibiotics in the United States is produced by China. And if that stops coming, there's going to be serious problems.